1942. A windowless basement beneath the Pearl Harbor Naval Station. No sunlight, no fresh air, just the smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Inside sits a man in a worn bathrobe and slippers. His eyes are bloodshot. He hasn't slept properly in weeks. His name is Major Joseph Rochefort. In his hands, thousands of fragments of intercepted Japanese naval code, JN-25. Garbage to anyone else. To him, a puzzle that could decide the fate of the entire Pacific War. The Imperial Japanese Navy believes its codes are unbreakable. They believe their next strike will land unseen, unexpected, devastating. They are wrong. Somewhere in this basement, a single, tired man is about to outsmart an empire, not with weapons, not with ships, but with patience and a single, brilliant lie. The prison had steel, he had a typewriter. Washington doesn't believe him yet. The brass in the Capitol insist Japan's next target is a place codenamed AF. Rochefort is certain AF means Midway Atoll. But certainty isn't proof, and without proof, the United States Navy could be sailing blind into the largest naval ambush in its history. So Rochefort does something almost absurd. He orders the radio station on Midway to send an unencrypted message in plain English, complaining that the island's freshwater distillation system has broken down. A lie, a bait, a trap built from nothing but words. If the Japanese intercept it, if they repeat it, if they encode it into their own messages back to Tokyo, then Rochefort will have his proof. The system was enormous. The weakness was small. Within hours, Japanese intelligence stations intercept the fake transmission. They report back to Tokyo in JN-25 code. Target AF is short on fresh water. Rochefort has his answer. Midway is the target. The trap is set, not by battleships, not by aircraft, but by a worn-out cryptanalyst in a bathrobe who never fired a single shot. How does a man with no weapon defeat an empire with the world's most powerful navy? The answer begins in a basement nobody was supposed to notice. To understand what Rochefort accomplished, you have to understand the machine he was fighting against. The Imperial Japanese Navy in 1942 was not a single force. It was layered: communications, codebooks, fleet command, radio discipline, each piece reinforcing the next. This was not just a building, it was a layered system. JN-25 was changed regularly. Operators followed strict procedure. Radio silence was enforced. Messages were broken into thousands of 5-digit code groups, each one meaningless without the correct cipher key. A key that shifted on a schedule the Americans were never supposed to know. On paper, the system was unbreakable. In practice, it depended on something far more fragile: human routine. Operators reused phrases. Clerks repeated patterns. Tired men, thousands of miles from home, made small, predictable choices. The same shorthand, the same habits, day after day. The system was enormous. The weakness was small. Rochefort's team in the dungeon had spent months, not days, mapping these patterns. Black coffee, sleepless nights, walls covered in scrawled fragments of code that meant nothing, until suddenly they meant everything. But knowing a pattern is not the same as proving a target. Washington needed certainty before risking the Pacific Fleet's last available carriers. And certainty is exactly what the system was designed to prevent. That's the seam Rochefort found. Not in the cipher itself, in the predictability of the men using it. The Japanese radio operators trusted their own system so completely they never imagined an American officer might lie to bait them into confirming it themselves. The freshwater trick worked precisely because the system was rigid. Rigid systems don't question unexpected information. They process it the way they always have. Feed it a false detail, and it obediently repeats that detail back, encoded, stamped, and sent straight to Tokyo. The system was built to endure decades. It collapsed in a single afternoon. With Midway confirmed, Admiral Nimitz now had something rarer than firepower in the Pacific: the enemy's intentions, written in his own hand. But knowing where the Japanese were going was only half the battle. The other half would be fought not in a basement of paper and coffee, but in the open sky, by young men flying outdated planes who already understood they might not come back. Rochefort handed them the map, but it was those young pilots who had to fly into the kill zone. What happens when intelligence runs out and only courage is left? June 4th, 1942. Dawn breaks over the Central Pacific. Aboard the USS Hornet, 15 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers sit lined up on deck. Slow, heavy, outdated machines built for an earlier war. Their commander is Major John Waldron. He has studied the maps. He knows exactly how this mission will likely end. Before climbing into his cockpit, he turns to his pilots, young men, some barely out of flight school, and says words that will outlive him. If the worst comes to worst, I want each one of us to do his utmost to destroy our enemies. If there is only one plane left to make a final run in, I want that man to go in and get a hit. No one argues. No one hesitates. They built walls of steel and fire. He sent men anyway. The squadron lifts off. Below them, the Japanese fleet, 4 aircraft carriers, dozens of escort ships, churns through open water, completely unaware of how close the American search planes are. VT-8 finds them first. Alone, no fighter escort, no dive bombers in sight yet. The Devastators drop low, lining up for a torpedo run, flying straight and level, the only way to release accurately. Straight and level means no evasive maneuvers, no way to dodge. Above them, Japanese Zero fighters peel off the combat air patrol and dive. One by one, the slow American bombers are caught in a crossfire of cannon fire and anti-aircraft bursts. Breathing stops. Plane after plane drops from the sky. Engines burning. Wings shearing off. Men who, minutes earlier, had checked their gear in total silence, now disappear into the waves. All 15 aircraft of Torpedo Squadron 8 are shot down. 29 men are lost in minutes. One man survives. Ensign George Gay floats in the open ocean, surrounded by burning wreckage. He pulls a seat cushion from his downed plane and holds it over his head, not for comfort, but to hide from the Japanese gunners still scanning the water for survivors. From beneath that cushion, hidden in plain sight, he watches the battle continue above him. The prison had steel. He had a piece of foam and stillness. What Gay doesn't know yet, what no one on either side fully understands in this moment, is that his squadron's sacrifice has already changed everything. By pulling every Japanese fighter down to sea level to destroy the torpedo bombers, VT-8 has accidentally cleared the skies above the fleet. The sky is wide open, and no one in the Japanese fleet has noticed yet. What happens when the system finally looks up, and it's already too late? Aboard the Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, the deck crews are in chaos, but not from fear, from procedure. Admiral Nagumo has just received word that American land-based bombers and now torpedo planes are attacking. His standard doctrine calls for rearming his strike aircraft with weapons suited for ship-to-ship combat, since no American carriers have yet been spotted. Filed, reinforced, authorized. Decks are crowded with bombs being swapped for torpedoes, torpedoes swapped for bombs. Fuel lines snake across the hangars as planes are refueled mid-shuffle. It is exactly the kind of disciplined, methodical process Japanese carrier doctrine was built around. The system was tightening. But the breach had already begun. Then a scout plane finally radios in. American carriers sighted to the northeast. Now, Nagumo must reverse the entire rearming process again. Bombs back off, torpedoes back on, in the middle of a live engagement, with VT-8's wreckage still smoking on the water below. Every deck on every carrier is now stacked with armed bombs, fuel hoses, and aircraft only half prepared. It is the single most dangerous configuration a carrier can be in. The fortress was tightening its defenses. It had no idea the breach was already overhead. 35 miles away, 3 squadrons of American SBD Dauntless dive bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey, are flying on fumes. They reached the expected coordinates and found nothing but open ocean. By regulation, they should already be turning back to preserve enough fuel to land. McCluskey doesn't turn back. He spots a thin, churning wake far below. A lone Japanese destroyer, the Arashi, racing at full speed to rejoin its fleet after chasing off an American submarine. McCluskey makes a decision that breaks every standard procedure in the book. Instead of returning to the carrier, what if the squadron follow the destroyer's wake, gambling the fuel, the mission, and dozens of lives on a guess? They built procedure to guide every decision. He decided to follow a trail of water instead. Minutes later, the wake leads exactly where McCluskey hoped. Directly beneath his wings, 4 Japanese carriers come into view. Decks packed with fuel, bombs, and aircraft. No fighter cover above them. Every single Zero is still down at sea level, finishing off the last of VT-8's wreckage. The system had just spent the last 20 minutes correcting itself. It had no idea the correction had opened the one window it could never close in time. What happens in the next 5 minutes will end 3 of Japan's finest carriers and decide the entire war in the Pacific. Naval records from June 4, 1942, capture the attack in clinical, bloodless language. Action reports list bomb hits, timestamps, fire control logs. Akagi hit 10:26. Kaga hit 10:24. Soryu hit 10:25. No mention of fear. No mention of the silence right before impact. For years after the battle, some historians in Washington remained skeptical that a single freshwater hoax could have been enough to confirm Midway as the target. Official inquiries questioned whether Rochefort's team had simply gotten lucky, whether the code-breaking effort deserved the credit history would later give it. It took declassified intercepts decades later to confirm what Rochefort already knew in that windowless basement. The trap worked exactly as designed, and Washington had nearly ignored it. The records remember the carriers. They almost forgot the man in the bathrobe. George Gay's own debrief, recorded just days after the battle, is short and matter-of-fact. He describes hiding under a seat cushion. He describes watching dive bombers fall on the Japanese fleet from underneath the waves. The Navy file notes his survival in a single paragraph. What stayed with me was the silence he described afterward. Floating alone for hours, the only man left from 15 aircraft, waiting to be found by either side. John Waldron's final words to his squadron were preserved only because one of his pilots wrote them down before the mission, almost as an afterthought. Had that pilot not survived to deliver his notes, history might never have recorded what Waldron said before sending his men into a fight none of them expected to survive. History recorded the battle in a single afternoon. The men who decided its outcome carried it for the rest of their lives. The official report says Midway was won by intelligence, timing, and a fortunate gamble. It does not fully capture what it cost the 29 men of Torpedo Squadron 8, or the one man left floating beneath the seat cushion, watching his friend's sacrifice turn into the turning point of the entire war. What does a victory cost the men who never got their names in the official record? Today, Midway Atoll is a quiet wildlife refuge, Albatross's nest where anti-aircraft batteries once stood. The runways are still there. So are a few concrete bunkers, half swallowed by sand and grass. Beneath the Pacific, the wrecks of Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu rest on the ocean floor, found only decades later by deep-sea expeditions, their hulls still scarred by the bomb hits recorded in those clinical 1942 action reports. The system was built to last for an empire. It lasted 5 minutes against the men who broke it. In Hawaii, the basement room, once known as the dungeon, still exists beneath what was the old naval station. No plaque marks it as the room where a tired man in a bathrobe helped change the course of the war. For years, almost no one outside the intelligence community knew it had mattered at all. Joseph Rochefort received no medal at the time. The recognition he deserved was delayed for decades, partly because the very secrecy that made his work effective also kept it hidden from public memory. He broke an empire's code. The empire never knew his name. George Gay returned home, the sole survivor of his squadron, and lived with that fact for the rest of his life. He later wrote about the men he flew with, men whose names are now etched onto a memorial, but who never saw what their deaths made possible. John Waldron's last order was not a guarantee of victory. It was an acceptance of probable death, given anyway, because the mission mattered more than the men giving it. Wade McCluskey's gamble, following a destroyer's wake instead of turning back, is taught today in military academies as a textbook case of decisive judgment under uncertainty. At the time, it was simply one tired pilot, low on fuel, refusing to give up on a hunch. The structure of the Imperial Japanese Navy was vast, disciplined, and built to dominate the Pacific for a generation. It was undone in 5 minutes by a lie about drinking water, a doomed squadron that drew the enemy's eyes downward, and one commander who decided a wake in the ocean was worth more than regulations. The system was permanent. The breach was over before lunch. 5 minutes, that's all it took to sink 3 of Japan's finest carriers and end the era of unchallenged Japanese naval dominance in the Pacific. The miracle at Midway wasn't luck. It was sleepless nights in a basement, a gambler's instinct above an empty ocean, and the blood of 29 men who never made it home. They built an empire on strength. It was broken by patience, a guess, and men who refused to turn back.